Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here to give you a closer look at the image quality from the little Kamlan 50mm. This is an f1.1 lens, and so has a huge maximum aperture, and even better, it has a very low price tag of only around 169 US dollars. And so today we're going to take a closer look at the image quality it's able to produce. I'm also going to give you a few tips on how to use it to its potential and also to give you a final verdict on the lens. So the first thing, of course, we've already taken a look at the build quality and the handling of it. And if you want to take a look at this episode here, you can see more information about that. But overall, it actually has a really nice build quality. It has a really nice manual focus ring that moves just as it should. On my copy, I find the aperture ring is a little tighter than what I would like, but it has loosened up some. The lens hood itself can sometimes also be a little bit stiff because it doesn't really have a definite click at its final point of travel. And so as a result, it kind of will stick there a little bit. And as you can see right now, I'm having some trouble breaking it free. And so anyway, that's just something to look for. But overall, I mean, for the money you're paying, this is a beautifully built little lens. More importantly, I know for many of you is you want to know about the image quality. You also want to know about the bokeh quality. And so we're going to take a look at some images and make some determinations. I'm going to compare it to one of my vintage lenses that I think is maybe an appropriate benchmark. And so we'll jump in and we'll take a look at some of these images together. I'll say first of all that doing these kinds of comparisons is somewhat difficult, particularly when you're dealing with lenses that don't have any kind of electronics, and so you're left to kind of guess at the aperture values and all of those type things. But in this case, also finding obviously a fair comparison point. And so what I've elected to do is to use one of my favorite vintage wide angle lens or wide aperture lenses, the SMC Takumar 50mm f1.4 lens. And so I think it should be a pretty fair point of comparison or a frame of reference. So on the left, we have the Kamlan. On the right, we have the Takumar. And so if we look at the center of the frame, obviously, even with the same white balance set, you get a little bit different rendering, a little bit warmer color rendering from the Takumar and a little bit cooler from the Kamlan lens, which is here on the left. In the center of the frame, you can definitely see, traces of some kind of softness, haze from both lenses. And you can also see, of course, that this is letting in more light, and as you would expect, looking up towards this corner here, definitely there is some vignette affecting both lenses, and you can see the evidence of that all around. It seems like it's a little bit heavier on the Kamlan lens than the Takumar. Right out towards the very edge of the frame, we see that it's very, very soft on the Kamlan. It's not necessarily amazing on the Takumar either, but it's definitely sharper and with more contrast than what the Kamlan wide open. But at the same time, you do have a range here in the center where you do have some usable sharpness. You just have to deal with some chromatic aberration as a part of it. So if we stop down to around f2 here now, and remember that's very approximate on the Kamlan lens. There are no fixed apertures, so I'm getting it as close as possible, but don't read too much into light transmission figures here because there are no hard preset aperture stops, and so you're just trying to approximate that. We can see now, however, that the Kamlan has definitely shown some improvement in sharpness here, and in the center of the frame, it's looking pretty decent here around f2. And if we go out towards the edge of the frame, however, we see that it's still pretty soft towards the edge, more chromatic aberration and just not a lot of detail. Definitely getting a better edge performance from the old Takumar lens. So now stop down to around f4, and we're going to see that here we've got definitely more contrast, less chromatic aberration on the Takumar lens. However, both lenses look pretty good in terms of detail rendering. Let's check out the sides, and here we see that while the Takumar is now sharp right out to the edge, the Kamlan edge performance, it never really sharpens up, and there's some kind of a stretching type distortion that takes place there. An aberration that is going to really not produce edge sharpness. And so if you're looking for a lens that's going to give you edge sharpness, even stop down, this is not the lens for that. So if we step back to a medium distance here, we see that while there's definitely traces of that chromatic aberration, wide open, the Kamlan lens is actually held up a little bit better here in the center, a little bit better contrast. Out towards the edge of the frame, both lenses are looking, pretty soft there, not a lot of image quality to speak of at wide open apertures. Now stopping down a bit, you note that both lenses are stopped down some, and yet we're still up against the shutter limits, and so that is negatively impacting image quality in bright conditions. However, we see here that at f2, there's been a significant improvement in the Takumar lens, much better sharpness and contrast in the center, less of an improvement on the Kamlan lens. However, here at medium distance in the corner, while there is some improvement on the Takumar, neither one of them are really all that impressive out towards the edge of the frame, and that's true on either side, although the Takumar does look a little bit better. Now at f2.8 in the center, both lenses show a pretty significant improvement there, and both of them frankly look pretty good here at the center of the frame. That's a nice amount of detail. Here's the very center of the frame, looks pretty good on the Kamlan, but all it takes is a little bit of a shift off center, and you see image quality really begins to erode, whereas the Takumar lens is holding on to it a little bit further out. And so here you see, towards the edge of the frame, it's quite soft, while the Takumar is looking better here for sure. And so edge sharpness, once again, is not a strength at all for the Kamlan lens. Now stop down to the f4 range. You can see that once again, center looks really, really good on both these lenses, and that's particularly true here on the Takumar lens. Corner sharpness is finally starting to improve a little bit on the Kamlan, but definitely here towards the edge of the frame, you can see that the Takumar is by far the strongest. So if we move off center a little bit, moving this direction, we see that image quality here is breaking down on the Kamlan lens, whereas the Takumar is looking pretty strong by comparison out towards the edge. So we can see even at f8, the extreme corners never actually sharpen up on the Kamlan lens. And so that's just not where its strength lies. The Takumar at this stage looks really good edge to edge, but extreme edges just never fully sharpen up on the Kamlan lens. That's just not what it's designed for. And so we'll take a little closer look now at what it is designed for. So left, we have the Kamlan lens. On the right, we have the Takumar. And so first thing you can see, of course, is that because of that larger maximum aperture, bokeh circles are much bigger, which means that it's able to produce more bokeh due to the wider maximum aperture than the Takumar lens. Looking towards the circles themselves, we see, I've always been impressed by the performance here from the Takumar. It has a very, very clean inner circle, and it has very good real-world bokeh as a result of that. Yes, there are a few bits of dust in there. The lens is 40 years old, give it a break. But as we look at the Kamlan, this is a really impressive performance here. That's a huge bokeh circle, and it's really soft. Not a lot of busyness there. Inner line is not strongly defined. And looking at the image as a whole, while yes, there is some, kind of deforming of bokeh circles and a little bit of that cat eye shape, it's actually really, minute compared to what a lot of lenses do in this situation. So if we can compare both lenses at f2 here, what we're going to find is that we have a much more even performance here from the Kamlan lens, and it has 3 more aperture blades, but the result of that is that the aperture stays really nice and circular compared to that of the Takumar. If we stop down further, that becomes even more obvious here, and we still have a nice circular shape on the aperture blades from the Kamlan, and compare that to that of the Takumar, which definitely has the shape, starting at octagonal shape, that's starting to become quite strong, whereas here we have a nice even performance there across the frame. Even stop down here to f4, you note that the bokeh circles are still nice and circular, no hesitation about those, whereas on the when it comes to the actual Takumar, we see that the shape is very strongly octagonal at this point, and so just not nearly as kind of desirable a look. If we look at our point of focus here on this, pretty little Milvus lens, we do find that Actually, in this case, I would say that there's more sharpness also coming from the Kamlan lens and a little bit better contrast. And that does illustrate a point that I want to make next. Now, put in the wrong situation, the Kamlan lens really struggles in real-world images. You know, for example, here where we have a brighter scene, we're going to see that the issues with chromatic aberration, and while there's some sharpness here in the center, enough to see that, it's accurately focused, we can see that it just does not handle this scene right here very well at all, unless you see some artistic, kind of painterly value to that. It has very little image quality to speak of around the edges of the frame, and definitely a struggle with contrast in this kind of brighter, higher contrast situation. Likewise here, even stopped down a bit. The fact that it stopped down to, I think, around f4-ish in the center of the frame, sharpness is pretty decent here. However, if we look towards the edge of the frame, we can definitely see an erosion of the image quality, and definitely we can see the extreme corners are smeared, just like we saw in our, our kind of staged test there. And you can definitely see some fringing that becomes more pronounced towards the edge of the frame. And so it's probably never a fantastic landscape lens as a result. Another issue in brighter sunlight is the fact that the lens definitely is flare prone, which of course is not at all unusual for a really wide aperture lens. And so here we can see that it doesn't necessarily like these high contrast areas between the chromatic aberration and the flare. Bokeh quality, of course, is nice here, but the flare pattern is pretty pronounced. Once again, conversely, if you use the lens to kind of to its benefit, here I've stopped down to around f11, and while there is a little bit of a ghosting pattern here, we can see that actually, although the 11 bladed aperture produces a somewhat maybe odd sun star, it looks okay there, and contrast is held up okay in the scene. And so just be careful the way that you actually position the sun in the frame, knowing that number one, the lens doesn't like very high contrast situations at wide aperture, and then secondly, it is flare prone if you're not careful. Now, if you use the lens to its strength, here even at f1.1, and this is more of an interior shot, as you can tell, that while at a pixel level, it's still not super sharp. But if you look at the image as a whole, and this may also appeal to those that are interested in maybe using it for some video work, the actual look in terms of the color rendition and the general aesthetic of the image itself is actually quite good. And I like the image, I like what it's done here, and without the super high contrast areas of outdoors in the middle of the day, it's able to render the scene a lot better. And likewise, if I change the point of focus towards infinity, yes, there is some, there's some softness that is here. However, you can see that there is detail that's there, and towards the edge of the frame, it does start to drop off. But once again, at the same time, there's a look to the image that I think will appeal to some people. Now here on a kind of a dimmer, less bright day, I was able to produce, stop down a more decent landscape image right towards the edge of the frame. It goes a little bit soft, but not too bad here in the center. And then in the actual center of the frame, it looks fine, not like amazing, but it looks fine. And the look of the image as a whole is nice. Here's another, and here again, without too contrasty a scene, it allows the lens to produce better contrast, and as a result, it looks sharper. There's more apparent resolution, and the image itself, I think, looks good. Here, of course, is where the real strength of the lens is. If you're going to use it at wide apertures, use it to produce bokeh, and it really shines doing that. So once again, if you're a pixel peeper, this lens is not necessarily for you. At a pixel level, as you can see, there's some chromatic aberration, there's some general haze from a lack of contrast. But if you look at the image collectively, it looks fantastic, particularly that beautiful transition to a complete defocus. Beyond here is a driveway. I just shot this leaf on a concrete driveway. So all of that is just more driveway, but it completely blurs away with this kind of shot. And so it produces a great looking result. Likewise here, I'm shooting, and again at a pixel level. This isn't terrible, it's not fantastic, but there's enough detail there to make it credible and to give it a little bit of three-dimensional quality. But as you can see, the actual defocused area, which could be busy on a lesser lens in terms of a bokeh producer, it actually looks really soft and nice. And so remembering that this is a lens that cost $169, that is some gorgeous bokeh to be produced from such an inexpensive optic. And again here, if I'm using the lens in a lower contrast situation, shooting indoors, this result is really not bad here. And if you look at it globally, you can see that nice melting away to defocus, which is really nice. Likewise here, it's more about kind of the feel of the image, and you can see that the defocused area is really quite beautiful. Now, I've noted that the lens doesn't have great contrast, but if you shoot it in lower contrast scenes, it actually produces some, nicer looking color and contrast. And so here, that looks quite good. And you've got, a little bit of busyness in this defocused area. At a certain range, the bokeh can get a little bit funky. Get it compared to this size, or this side where it's softer here compared to here. But overall, that's a nice looking image and shot very close to it's a very wide aperture there, but producing a nice result. This image here, I think, is one of my favorites in terms of demonstrating what the lens can do in the best kind of situation. This is somewhere around 1.3, just the slightest bit of closing the aperture. But look there's 4 pumpkins beyond this. Look how completely they have melted away. Very nice, very great quality of bokeh there. And the color rendition here is good. And in a low contrast situation, kind of an overcast day, this is just shot on kind of our doorstep area. You can see that it's actually produced very nice contrast bite and an excellent rendering to this image as a whole. And in the plane of focus, the detail is not too shabby, not exceptional, but not bad. And if you look at the image globally, it actually looks quite excellent. So word to the wise, use this lens to its strength, learn how to use it, and you will get better images out of it. So as you can see, this lens, it definitely has some weaknesses along with some strengths. In terms of its weaknesses, it really is not critically sharp. I wouldn't call it critically sharp at any aperture, but that's particularly true in the corners. And at wider apertures, there's kind of a sweet spot of sharpness towards the center of the frame. But as you move away from the center, the sharpness quickly deteriorates. And so because of that, you're going to want to be careful in the way that you compose using this lens. In other words, if you put your subject towards the edge of the frame, don't look for a lot of sharpness there at wide apertures. The upside, of course, is that at wide apertures, really at most apertures, the bokeh quality is quite good. There are a few distances in ratios between your subject and the background, where the background quality of the bokeh can get a little bit busy perhaps. But for the most part, it produces a lot of very soft, very creamy bokeh. And so if you're more interested in images that kind of, you're looking at the look of the images, maybe the story that the image might tell, more so than trying to shoot test charts or trying to demonstrate how sharp your equipment is. If you're wanting to show off sharpness, this is not the lens for you. But if you're more of a creative type who wants images that are a little bit more of storytelling, maybe you kind of like the more dreamy quality that less contrast, a little bit more haze produces, this could be a lens for you. Be careful, as we noted, in the kind of light conditions that you use. If you're wanting it to have, good color saturation and contrast, because it's best used indoors or in kind of more muted lighting conditions, overcast, that kind of thing. You're going to get a more diffused light that it does better with. In high contrast situations, it's not going to perform all that fantastic for you. So just kind of be aware of the limitations. The thing is that there's really no other lens that you can get this kind of aperture in at such a low price. And so you're going to have to kind of live with some of the compromises that come with it. And so again, if you'll use it to its strengths, it can produce some beautiful images. And here are a few that I've taken with the lens. And of course, you can look in the description down below. You can see even more images at the image gallery that I've been producing there. And so bottom line is that this lens is a budget lens. And you know, you're reminded of that as you look at its absolute sharpness. At the same time, I've shot a lens that is very similar to this that is not at all a budget lens, and that is Canon's own EF-50mm f1.0 L series lens. That's an autofocusing lens. It's not manufactured anymore. It's rare and it's very expensive. Most used copies are going for north of 4,000 US dollars. But you know, of all the lenses that I have used, this lens actually reminded me of that lens the most, in that it has the ability to produce really huge amounts of background blur used in the right kind of lighting conditions, say, you know, restaurant lighting conditions. It produces really nice looking images. But if you try to use it kind of as a general purpose traditional lens, you're probably not going to be all that satisfied with it because the image quality is not all that fantastic. A lot like this lens right here. But for producing unique images, the 1.0 L from Canon, it certainly could do that. And at a much cheaper price if you've got a mirrorless body either from Sony or a Canon M system or a Fuji X mount or even a Micro Four Thirds. This lens is going to provide a lot of fun of playing around with it at a pretty low entry price. You can find some links at some places to purchase it. When I launched my image gallery to begin with, almost everywhere was sold out at that point. Fortunately, it is back in stock right now. And so if you want to order one for yourself, you can jump into those links and order one there. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you haven't already, you can follow me on social media. You can become one of my patrons. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.